He was minutes away from sealing a $1 billion deal until his quiet maid whispered 5 words that turned his entire world upside down. The morning sun spilled golden light over the sprawling estate on Hazelwood Drive, casting long, crisp shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. From the outside, the mansion looked like a palace carved from ivory, grand, elegant, impenetrable. Every inch of it reflected power and precision. Behind its glass walls and marble columns lived Remington Remy Croswell, a 42-year-old billionaire known for revolutionizing synthetic pharmaceuticals. He was the founder and CEO of Croswell Biotech, a company that turned dying men into headlines and incurable diseases into distant memories for those who could afford it. Remy was not a man of chaos. His life was meticulously structured, down to the minute. Every morning began the same: a silent breakfast on the veranda, 2 perfectly poached eggs, half a grapefruit, 1 glass of spring water, and no coffee. Caffeine, he said, distorted logic. Today, however, the schedule pulsed with urgency. At precisely 11 a.m., Remy would enter a high-stakes virtual negotiation with Takura Medics, Japan's leading biotech conglomerate. The merger had been months in the making, a whisper-quiet war of attorneys, investors, and non-disclosure agreements. If everything went smoothly, Croswell Biotech would soon have global dominance. This was not just a business deal, it was an empire-forging moment. Remy sat in his office, staring at 3 oversized monitors glowing with slides, data points, and legal clauses. He wore a sharp slate-gray suit, every seam tailored to armor his confidence. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the desk, his mind razor-focused. No interruptions were allowed that morning. Not from his COO, not from his investors, and especially not from his staff, which is why it was strange, almost insulting, when the door creaked open softly and someone stepped inside without knocking. "Mr. Croswell," came a quiet voice. He looked up, his irritation immediate. It was the maid. Her, Callista Maeve, had only been working at the estate for 6 months, brought in by the agency after the last maid was let go, for sneaking photos of Remy's private quarters. Callista was different, unassuming, always quiet. She moved through the house like a shadow, never too close, never in the way. Yet something about her lingered. Perhaps it was the way she avoided eye contact, or how her auburn hair was always tucked beneath a plain scarf. She never spoke unless spoken to. Now, standing in his doorway, she looked directly at him. Her eyes, an odd shade of molten amber, didn't blink. "I'm busy," he snapped. "This is not the time." "I know, but you need to hear this," she said. "Alone." Her tone was calm, steady, but urgent. It wasn't the voice of someone bringing laundry or asking for a day off. It was the voice of someone with a secret. Remy narrowed his eyes. "Do you have any idea what I'm preparing for?" "Yes," she replied. "That's why I'm here. If you sign those papers today, you'll lose everything." He stared at her, stunned. "Excuse me?" Callista stepped into the room and shut the door behind her, locking it with a soft click. The sound felt heavier than it should have. "Takura Medics isn't merging with you, Mr. Croswell. They're gutting your company from the inside. One of your board members is leaking proprietary data. They already filed patents in Japan 2 days ago, based on your research. The moment you sign that agreement, they own everything." The silence in the room grew thick and sharp. Remy rose slowly from his chair. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Her lips curled into a small, sad smile. "Someone who used to work for Takura." He stared at her, stunned, his thoughts spinning faster than his heartbeat. This woman, this quiet maid, just claimed to know something that could destroy the very foundation of his empire. And somehow, he believed her. Outside, the estate remained silent and serene, but inside, the storm had just begun. For a moment, Remy Croswell didn't move. His pulse thudded in his ears, his hands clenched on the edge of his desk. The woman in front of him, his maid, the person he'd barely acknowledged over the past 6 months, had just locked his office door and accused one of his board members of corporate espionage. And worse, she spoke with a precision that made it impossible to dismiss her as paranoid. He studied her carefully now, truly seeing her for the first time. Callista Maeve stood calmly, her posture straight, her fingers laced in front of her apron as if she were delivering nothing more than a grocery list. But her eyes, those strange amber eyes, were sharp, analytical, watchful. the kind of eyes that had seen too much and learned never to blink. You expect me to believe you were a spy? Remy finally said, voice low. Callista didn't flinch. Not a spy. A systems analyst. I worked in Takura's internal intelligence division. I specialize in acquisition integration strategies, specifically how to dismantle competitor infrastructure post-merger. I was very good at it. Remy took a slow breath and crossed the room toward her, keeping his voice even but edged with steel. And you're telling me that this entire merger was a trap? That Takura planned to cannibalize my company? Callista nodded once. They've already begun. 2 days ago, they registered 3 patents based on your synthetic compound protocols. They wouldn't have access to that unless someone on your board handed it over. I saw the filings. I still have clearance on some of their back-end systems. Names, Remy demanded. Which board member? Callista hesitated for the first time. Her fingers tightened. Dr. Harlan Stowe. The name dropped like a hammer. Harlan had been with Croswell Biotech since its inception. Remy's former professor at Yale, his closest advisor, even godfather to his niece. He was a man Remy would have trusted with his own life, but he also had access to everything. Research databases, internal server credentials, proprietary lab results. If anyone could leak such material unnoticed, it was him. That's a serious accusation, Remy said, jaw tense. Do you have proof? Callista reached into her apron and pulled out a small USB drive. It's all here, she said quietly. Takura's patent timestamps, internal messages, the metadata from Stowe's data transfer. You'll find that the breach came from inside your Aspen facility. Remy took the drive but didn't plug it in. He stared at it like it was a live wire, one that might burn down everything he'd built. Why now? He asked after a moment. Why wait until today? Callista looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I didn't want to believe it, and because I needed time to collect enough to convince you. If I'd come sooner, you wouldn't have listened. You'd have fired me. She wasn't wrong. Remy walked to the bar cart, poured himself a glass of water, and downed it in one gulp. Then he turned back to her. How do I know this isn't a double play? He asked. That you're not feeding me just enough to stop this deal, so Takura can regroup and try again? Callista's expression shifted for the first time. A flicker of pain crossed her face, quiet but unmistakable. Because I lost someone, she said. A brother. He was a chemist at a small biotech startup in Oregon. Takura made him an offer. He signed, trusting them just like you. Within 6 months, his lab was shut down. His name was stripped from his own research. They crushed everything he worked for, and they made it legal. He died last year. Suicide. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she didn't let the emotion spill further. She stood firm. I couldn't watch them do it again, she said. Remy didn't respond. He stared out the tall window of his office, his mind spiraling through possibilities. The merger deal had been vetted by legal teams, accountants, economists. Everything had seemed perfect. But now, he turned back to her. What do you want? He asked. Callista tilted her head. What do you mean? Why tell me all this? What's your angle? You could have sold this information to a rival, to the press. You could have used it to blackmail me. But instead, you walk in here and hand me a flash drive. Why? She didn't answer for a long moment. Then simply, because I wanted to be someone better than I was at Takura. There was a knock on the door. Mr. Croswell? Came a voice. Your team is ready. The call starts in 10 minutes. Remy looked at the clock. 10 minutes. Everything he had worked for, the merger, the empire, the legacy, hinged on what he would say and do next. He looked down at the USB in his palm, then back at Callista, and for the first time in a very long time, he hesitated. Remy Croswell stood at a crossroads few men ever faced, and even fewer recognized in time. His board of directors was waiting. The global press had already begun circling like hawks, anticipating the announcement. In less than 10 minutes, his face would appear on screens from New York to Tokyo, with millions watching as he confirmed the most lucrative merger in pharmaceutical history. But inside his sleek, high-rise office, all the oxygen seemed to have vanished. The polished surfaces, the glass walls, even the ticking of the clock. Everything pressed in on him like judgment. Callista Maeve stood silently near the door, her figure barely shifting. She didn't try to convince him further. She had already said more than enough. And that, strangely, gave her more credibility than if she had begged. Remy moved back to his desk with deliberate steps. He inserted the USB drive into the side of his encrypted laptop, bypassing the corporate firewall and booting a private forensic viewer his cybersecurity chief had designed for his eyes only. A folder appeared immediately, labeled simply, Proof. He opened it. The screen blinked once, then filled with documents. Real, damning, brutal. Internal patent submissions from Takura Medics, dated 48 hours prior. File names with unmistakable code structures that matched Croswell Biotech's proprietary formulas. Memos written in Japanese but translated by auto software, referring to acquisition neutralization and total data absorption strategies. And then came the emails. They were what broke him. One message stood out. From hstowercrosswellbio.com to an encrypted Takura address, titled Phase 3 Delivery Complete. Attached was an export log showing a download of Croswell's entire synthetic genome library, over 32 terabytes of data. Time-stamped, traceable, undeniable. Remy sat back slowly, hands falling away from the keyboard like dead weight. The screen glowed in front of him, but his mind had gone elsewhere. Into the past. Into conversations with Harlan over wine, over chess games in the old atrium. The man had been his mentor, his friend. How long had it been a lie? Callista watched him, but still said nothing. Then came the second knock. Sir, it was Sasha, his executive assistant. The Japan team is live. They're asking for you. Remy's voice cracked out dryly. Tell them there's a delay. 15 minutes. A pause. Yes, sir. He waited until her footsteps faded before speaking again. They'll try to bury this, he murmured, mostly to himself. Harlan, the board, the entire legal arm. They'll say it's coincidence. They'll say the patents were filed by mistake. They'll claim Takura's tech is independently developed. They will, Callista agreed gently. But you're not powerless. He looked at her, his mind sharpening again, piece by piece. If I cancel this deal now, the stock will take a hit. The shareholders will demand answers. I'll be forced to explain everything, and if I accuse Stowe, I need hard proof ready. We're talking about reputation, lawsuits, maybe criminal charges. That's why I copied everything, she replied, reaching into her pocket and producing a second USB. This one's for your legal team. And this, she held up a slim gray notebook, leather-bound and visibly worn, is a journal I kept while working at Takura. Names, dates, internal conversations. I risked everything to collect it. You'll find confirmation of a pattern, how they've used this tactic on 3 other biotech companies before you. Remy reached for the notebook slowly, reverently, like he was holding a detonator. Why didn't anyone stop them before? They settled everything privately. Takura's lawyers buried their victims under mountains of NDAs and quiet payouts. And the ones who didn't take the money? They disappeared from the industry. Remy stood from his chair, straightened his tie, and walked to the window. Below, the city pulsed with life. Cars, people, ambition. His kingdom, alive and blind. For the first time in years, he felt something strange inside his chest. Not fear, not anger, but clarity. He turned back to Callista. You're not just a maid. You're an insider. A whistleblower. I never wanted to be either, she said. I just wanted to stop watching good people be destroyed. Remy stepped closer, folding the notebook into his coat. I owe you a debt. I'm not here for that, she replied. But you may have just saved everything I've built. Callista gave the faintest smile, and then her gaze shifted toward the locked door. You should decide quickly. If you delay too long, they'll know something's wrong. And if they suspect that you know the truth, they'll act first, Remy nodded once. He walked to his desk, tapped a hidden switch, and activated a secure conference line. Not the one scheduled for Takura, but the encrypted line that reached his private legal and security teams. As the line connected, he looked up at Callista. You said you wanted to be someone better, he said quietly. You just became the most important person in my company. Callista's eyes widened faintly, just for a second, and then she was gone, slipping out the back hallway, leaving him alone with the decision that would alter not just his future, but the future of an entire industry. Remy Croswell stood alone in his office, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like the gravity of a falling world. The notebook Callista had given him rested beside the encrypted laptop, while the screen continued cycling through damning evidence. Data theft, insider leaks, strategic manipulation by Takura Medics. He straightened his suit with slow, deliberate movements. His fingers trembled for the first time in years. Not from fear, but from something deeper, more raw. Betrayal. He had built Croswell Biotech from scratch. Nights spent in a lab. Deals brokered over midnight flights. Dreams fueled by grief and desperation. Ever since his mother died from a rare autoimmune disease that no company had been willing to research. He swore then he would create something that mattered, something incorruptible. And now, his own mentor, Dr. Harlan Stowe, the man who had once gifted him his first microscope, had sold him out. He picked up the notebook again and opened the leather cover. Callista's handwriting was neat, almost clinical. Inside were names, dates, internal memos she'd reconstructed from memory, and fragments of files. There were meetings logged at midnight, pseudonyms used in international filings, front companies. It was more than enough for a preliminary injunction. Remy's secure line chimed. "Mr. Croswell," came a deep voice from the other end. It was Evan Griggs, his personal legal counsel, an aggressive, whip-smart, former federal prosecutor with a spine made of granite. I just reviewed the contents of the USB you sent. It's real. All of it. If we act now, we can block the merger and file for an immediate restraining order in federal court. What's the exposure risk? Enormous, Griggs said bluntly. If the board finds out, they'll try to oust you. Your shareholders may panic, but if we move fast, you can get ahead of the narrative. You'd be saving the company from hostile acquisition and IP theft. That's survivable. Signing the deal, that's a death sentence. Remy closed his eyes for a moment. Then he said, with quiet certainty, "Draft the order. I want Takura locked out by noon. Already working on it." "What about the board?" "I'll deal with them personally." The line disconnected. Remy turned back toward the window. His reflection stared back at him, hollow-eyed, older than he remembered. But behind his own tired gaze was a flicker of something he hadn't seen in himself in years. Fight. He unlocked the office door and stepped into the hallway. The staff turned as he passed. His assistant, Sasha, blinked in surprise. "Sir, the Japanese team is asking if—" "Cancel the call," he said without slowing. "Tell them there's been a legal complication. Should I schedule another time?" "No," he said. "There won't be one." He marched into the elevator, descending to the executive boardroom on the 12th floor. Inside, 10 men and women, all members of the Croswell Biotech board, were already seated, murmuring, adjusting suits, sipping coffee. And at the head of the table, like a crowned serpent in human skin, sat Dr. Harlan Stowe. The room quieted when Remy entered. He stood at the head of the table, meeting each person's eyes. "Then, effective immediately," he began, voice cold and clear, "we are suspending all negotiations with Takura Medics." A wave of confusion swept through the room. "Remy, what are you talking about?" Harlan said, voice smooth with practiced concern. "You're walking away from the deal of the century?" "No, I'm protecting my company from sabotage," Remy snapped, placing Callista's notebook on the table. "Takura filed 3 patents this week based on proprietary Croswell data. That data was leaked by someone in this room." Murmurs became shouts. Faces turned pale. "And you have proof of this?" "Theft?" Harlan asked, his smile faltering just enough to betray a fracture. "Yes," Remy said flatly. "And legal is filing a federal injunction as we speak." He turned to the others. "I trusted every one of you to defend what we built. If you knew about this and said nothing, resign now. If you didn't, help me clean house." Stowe's face hardened. "You're making a mistake, Remington." "No, Harlan," he said quietly. "You did." Security entered the room at Remy's signal. Without resistance, but with narrowed eyes, Dr. Harlan Stowe stood, straightened his suit, and allowed himself to be escorted out. His expression was unreadable, but Remy saw something in his eyes. Not fear, not regret, but contempt. The boardroom remained frozen in silence as the doors closed behind him. One of the members, a woman named Sabine Ashford, spoke first. "What now?" Remy looked around the room. "Now," he said. "We rebuild from truth." And for the first time that morning, he finally exhaled. The boardroom emptied slowly, like smoke clearing after a fire. A few members left in a daze, whispering among themselves. Others offered hesitant nods of support. Sabine Ashford remained behind the longest, her arms folded tightly over her chest as she studied Remy with a calculating gaze. Not cold, but cautious. She was the only one besides Harlan with enough seniority to challenge Remy publicly, yet she had stayed quiet. Now, the storm had passed, for the moment. Remy lingered after everyone had left, his hands braced on the sleek black table. The sun streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, warm and unforgiving, exposing every fingerprint on the polished surface, every wrinkle in his suit. For years, he had trusted that brilliance and hard work could shield him from betrayal. But this was personal. It was poison in the bloodstream of everything he had built. And yet, beneath the exhaustion and outrage, a strange thing had begun to rise in his chest. Gratitude. Not for the betrayal, but for the warning. He pulled out his phone and sent a direct message to Callista through the secure employee system. Meet me in the West Courtyard. 20 minutes. Private. Then he closed his eyes for a moment and let his shoulders drop. The facade he had worn all morning cracked just slightly. His empire had nearly been stolen from beneath his feet by someone he considered family. But it wasn't. Not really. Because family didn't sell your life's work to the highest bidder. 20 minutes later, the West Courtyard was bathed in soft shade, vines curling around iron trellises and the scent of lemon verbena drifting from the nearby garden. It was the only part of the estate that felt like a refuge instead of a monument to wealth. It was quiet, intentional. Callista was already there, standing near a stone bench, her apron replaced by a simple navy blouse and jeans. She looked younger in daylight. Not less serious, just less burdened. Remy approached slowly, hands in his pockets, his tone gentler than it had been all day. I owe you more than I can say. Callista gave a small nod, eyes searching his face. You acted fast, faster than I expected. I've built my life on instinct, he said. And something in your voice this morning told me you weren't lying. She smiled faintly. I wasn't. He sat down on the bench and gestured for her to join him. She hesitated, then took the opposite end. I fired Stowe, Remy said, watching a bird land on a nearby hedge. Security walked him out an hour ago. Legal is preparing charges. Our cybersecurity team is tracking all his digital access points. Callista nodded, but didn't look triumphant. Instead, she looked weary. He'll deny everything. He always does. And Takura will push back hard. They'll say it was all a misunderstanding, an unfortunate overlap of research. But they've done this before. They'll try to paint you as paranoid. Remy looked at her. And you? She shrugged. They know who I am now. The minute this becomes public, they'll dig up everything. Old employment contracts, photos. They'll leak anything they can to make me look unstable. Remy exhaled through his nose. I won't let them touch you. She smiled, but there was something in her expression. Resignation. I appreciate that, but I didn't come forward for protection. I came forward because I couldn't live with what I knew. After what happened to my brother, her voice trailed off. It wasn't just about stopping Takura. It was about being able to look at myself in the mirror. Remy turned to face her fully now. Your brother? What happened to him? Did he ever get justice? She shook her head. No. After Takura absorbed his lab, they voided his name from every project. Said his patents were invalid because he breached contract terms. He spiraled after that. Said he felt like he didn't exist anymore. Silence lingered like a fog between them. I'm sorry, Remy said finally. Truly. Callista blinked once and gave the smallest of nods. I know you can't fix that, she said. But maybe you can keep it from happening to someone else. Remy looked back toward the mansion. I plan to. The board doesn't know it yet, but I'm restructuring. Tightening our IP protocols. Rewriting our employee integrity charters. Anyone caught colluding with outside entities will face criminal investigation, no matter who they are. Callista raised an eyebrow. You think the rest of the board will support that? He smirked. They don't have a choice. I own 58% of the voting shares. She gave a surprised chuckle. That'll help. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the sun warming their skin, the breeze stirring the leaves overhead. Then Remy said quietly, You could have gone to the press, you know. You could have ruined me. Callista tilted her head. And then what? Watch Takura spin the story? Watch your name dragged through the mud until you were just another disgraced billionaire in a headline? He looked at her deeply now. I didn't want to destroy you, she said. I wanted to wake you up. Remy nodded slowly. You did. A pause. Then he added, What do you want to do next, Callista? Because I'm not letting you go back to housekeeping. She blinked. What are you saying? I'm saying I need someone who sees patterns others miss. Someone who knows how to find cracks in perfect walls. Someone who still gives a damn about truth. I want you in my office, as an analyst. A full-time position. Her lips parted, surprised. You'd hire me? I'd be an idiot not to. She didn't respond right away. The courtyard filled with birdsong. Finally, she whispered, Yes, I'll take it. And in that moment, as their gazes held in the dappled light, something unspoken passed between them. Not just professional trust, but the seed of something deeper, something human, something real. 2 weeks had passed since the aborted merger, and the fallout had shaken Croswell Biotech to its very core. The corporate media swirled with speculation, leaks, and half-truths. Headlines ranged from merger collapses in mysterious turn to CEO Croswell dismantles board after shocking discovery. Investors panicked. Stocks dipped. Lawsuits were threatened from both sides of the Pacific. But Remy Croswell didn't flinch. Not this time. Inside his fortress-like corporate tower, the real work had begun. Entire departments were undergoing audits. Security teams worked around the clock to rebuild the firewalls Stowe had quietly poked holes through over the years. Internal servers were split into 3 tiers of clearance. Every contract from the last 5 years was being reviewed by a legal task force. At the heart of it all, in an office once reserved for the VP of Data Risk, sat Callista Maev. The room had been redesigned at Remy's request. Clean, minimal, a wraparound desk with 5 monitors, and encrypted direct lines to legal, security, and the CEO himself. Her badge was now gold, a distinction held only by the C-suite. And yet, she wore it like it didn't matter. Same plain blouses, same quiet focus. She had gone from Maid to one of the most powerful figures inside the company. But nothing about her presence suggested she was intoxicated by power. If anything, she seemed weighed down by responsibility. And purpose. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, as storm clouds rolled across the city skyline, Remy stepped into her office unannounced. He looked different, less polished. His suit jacket was open, tie gone, sleeves rolled up. There were deep shadows under his eyes, evidence of long nights and endless meetings. But there was something else there, too. Pride. Do you have a moment? He asked. Callista looked up from the screen where she had been cross-referencing transfer logs from their Singapore lab. She nodded. Of course. He walked in and stood beside her desk, scanning the lines of code on her primary monitor. You found something. She gestured toward the screen. I traced the signature Harlan used to access the genome servers. He tried to mask it through a proxy based in Romania, but the exit node reconnected to an old satellite campus IP in Denver. Sloppy. Remy smirked slightly. We always joked that Harlan couldn't use a coffee machine without help. Should have known he'd be careless. I also found 2 more data leaks, minor ones. They went through lesser-known consultants, contractors from a firm called Isodyne. I've already flagged them for investigation. He paused, then looked at her more closely. Callista, how do you know how to do all this? You were a systems analyst, yes, but the level of precision. I studied cryptographic engineering before Takura. Worked under a pseudonym. When I took the job as a maid, I thought I'd left that part of me behind. Turns out it was just waiting. Remy pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The company is changing, he said. Because of you. We're not just cleaning up the rot. We're restructuring the entire philosophy. I held on to too much trust for too long. Let comfort become blindness. Callista leaned back slightly. You were building something good. You still are. But even good men need to be tested. He nodded slowly. That's what you were, wasn't it? My test. No, she said softly. Your mirror. The words landed with quiet finality. Rain tapped gently against the glass as the silence stretched. Neither of them felt the need to fill it. Eventually, Remy leaned forward again. There's something else, he said. Takura sent me a message yesterday. Unofficial. They want to restart discussions under new terms. They fired the executive responsible for patent acquisition and offered a public statement acknowledging procedural error. Callista's eyes narrowed. They're scared. They should be. What will you do? Remy's expression hardened. Nothing. We're not merging. Not now, not ever. We'll grow without them. It'll be harder, slower, but honest. Callista nodded, her gaze returning to the screen. Then I'll help you make it work. He watched her for a moment. I know, he said simply. As he stood to leave, he paused near the door. You know, I don't think I would have had the courage to do all this without you. She smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her. You had the courage, Remy. You just needed someone to remind you what it looked like. That night, Croswell Biotech released a company-wide video message from the CEO himself. In it, Remy Croswell addressed the truth behind the failed merger, admitted his misjudgment, and outlined the new protocols being instituted. He didn't flinch or hide. He named the sabotage. He named the betrayer. But what shook the corporate world even more was when he introduced the newest executive hire, a former systems analyst, once known inside the mansion as simply the Maid. Her name was Callista Maiev, and the world would never overlook her again. In the weeks that followed Callista's appointment and the video statement that had rippled across the biotech world, Croswell Biotech underwent a kind of metamorphosis that few corporate entities survive, and even fewer initiate by choice. Headlines once filled with skepticism now began to shift. Terms like integrity restructuring and internal redemption were tossed around by analysts and editorial boards. Investors, after their initial unease, began to trickle back. And Remy Croswell's name, formerly synonymous with invincibility, became associated with something far rarer in his world: accountability. But change of this magnitude didn't come without resistance. On a brisk Monday morning, Callista arrived at headquarters earlier than usual. She'd developed the habit of walking through the building before anyone else arrived. It gave her time to observe, to notice what had changed, and more importantly, what hadn't. That morning, she found a note taped to her door. Not the digital alerts she was used to, but actual paper. Handwritten. Traders don't get corner offices. You don't belong here. There was no signature, no direct threat. Just 7 words, scrawled in shaky, uneven letters. She stood there for a long moment, holding the note in her hand, heart steady but eyes sharp. Then she folded it in half, tucked it into her pocket, and went inside. By the time Remy walked into her office mid-morning, she had already reviewed 3 new server risk reports, flagged a possible internal leak in the Paris branch, and finalized her recommendations for the upcoming board restructure. He noticed the tension in her posture immediately. What happened? Callista didn't look up. Someone left me a note. Remy's face darkened. Show me. She handed it to him without a word. He read it once, then again. Did anyone see who did it? No cameras in the hallway leading to my office, she said. I've already asked security to cross-check handwriting samples from all building access logs this morning. I'm going to find them, Remy said, voice low and measured. And when I do, they'll be out. No severance, no NDA. I don't care if they're the CFO's nephew. Callista finally looked at him. I'm not shaken, Remy. Just disappointed. He nodded. It's not just about you. It's about the culture we're still fighting to uproot. There are people here who thrived under silence and complicity. And you, he pointed at the folded note, you're a threat to that. I know. Remy sat down across from her, rubbing a hand across his jaw. We're in the thick of it now. This isn't the end of the storm. It's the eye. Quiet but dangerous. She considered that, then asked, Do you regret making it public? Naming Stowe? Remy shook his head without hesitation. No. It was the only way to clean it properly. Sunlight and fire, nothing less. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. But I should have anticipated this. The backlash. You were just doing the right thing. And now, you're the lightning rod. Callista's lips tightened, not out of anger, but resolve. Let them strike. I don't burn easy. A small smile touched the corners of his mouth, but it didn't last long. He pulled out a secure tablet from his satchel. There's something else, he said. You were right about isodyne. Our audit confirmed it. 3 consultants were on Takura's payroll through shell companies. We've already filed cease and desist orders and handed over the findings to the DOJ. Callista sat back slowly. That means they tried a 2-pronged attack: internal sabotage and contracted infiltration. Remy nodded grimly. They wanted to own us completely, and if you hadn't stepped in, she didn't let him finish. You would have signed, I know. He looked down at the note in his hand, then up at her again. Do you still want to be here, Callista? After everything? She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze moved to the window, where the city pulsed beneath a silver sky. Then she looked back at him. Yes, because the work we're doing now isn't just damage control. It's building something honest, and that's rare. Remy exhaled, a quiet relief. There's something poetic about this, he said. You used to clean these floors. Now you're cleaning the rot from the system. Callista allowed herself a dry laugh. Still housekeeping in a way, just with more encryption. Remy stood, resting a hand lightly on the back of her chair. If it ever gets too much, if the pressure or the looks or the whispers, if it chips away at you, I need you to promise me something. What? That you'll tell me. You won't carry it alone. Her expression softened. I promise. As he walked out, the door closed gently behind him. Callista sat in silence for a moment. Then she turned back to her work. Later that evening, alone in her apartment, she unfolded the note one more time, read the words again. This time, she didn't feel disappointment. She felt defiance, and she lit a match, watched it burn slowly in the sink, let the smoke rise like a ritual. Let them come, she thought. She wasn't going anywhere. A full month had passed since the day Callista Maev whispered the truth into Remy Croswell's ear and changed the trajectory of his life, his company, and perhaps the very culture of an industry that had grown fat on silence. Croswell Biotech had weathered the storm, but not without scars. The merger had officially collapsed, Takura Medics publicly withdrawing amid rising scrutiny from the U.S. Department of Justice. Dr. Harlan Stowe was under investigation, his personal assets frozen pending legal action. A federal whistleblower protection order had been filed on Callista's behalf, granting her full immunity and classification as a key witness in an unfolding international probe. Inside the company, change wasn't just happening, it was accelerating. Callista's security team had rooted out 2 more data leaks, and a new ethics and transparency division had been founded, with Callista at its helm. Her role had grown far beyond analyst. She now sat in executive board meetings, oversaw corporate integrity operations, and was given full veto power over sensitive external partnerships. Still, the nights were long, the resistance subtle. Passive-aggressive emails, awkward silences in elevators, longtime employees resenting the woman who had gone from wiping counters to issuing security protocols. But Callista never flinched. She had endured worse in silence. Now she faced it out loud. That Friday evening, as the city outside the Croswell Tower was bathed in golden dusk, Remy stood in the executive atrium, holding a glass of sparkling water as the company's senior leadership trickled in for what had been framed as an informal, the recommitment gathering. But the air felt heavier than that, like the beginning of something new, or the quiet celebration of something narrowly saved. Callista entered just as Remy was speaking with the new CFO. She wore a dark green blouse and tailored slacks, no longer the shapeless clothes of her former station. Yet she didn't try to look powerful. She didn't have to. She simply was. When Remy saw her, he excused himself mid-sentence and crossed the room toward her. You came, he said, more relieved than surprised. Callista nodded. I didn't think I could skip the funeral of the old Croswell, he smiled. More like the birth of the new one. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment as waiters moved through the room, the sound of conversation filling the glass-domed space. I got a letter yesterday, Remy said softly, turning to her, from the CEO of one of our former rivals. She said she'd watched our statement, that it made her reconsider her own company's structure. She's hiring a new integrity officer. Someone with a background like yours? Callista raised an eyebrow. A maid? A woman who knows what silence costs? She nodded slowly, the weight of those words settling into her chest. Then, more quietly, Remy added, We've inspired something, Callista. You have. What started as survival became something else. She looked up at him. Really looked at him. Hope, she said. He nodded. They didn't speak about what came next, not about future mergers or IPOs or even expansion, because those things, though inevitable, were no longer the measure of success. Not for Remy, not for her. Instead, he turned slightly, offering his hand. Dance with me? Callista blinked. What? The music's playing, he said, tilting his head toward the soft jazz trio in the corner. It'd be a shame to let it go to waste. She hesitated, but then slowly placed her hand in his. They moved to the center of the room. Not everyone noticed at first, but then someone did. Then others. And within minutes, the quiet rhythm of conversation had dimmed as two figures began to dance in the center of a space, once defined by hierarchy and glass ceilings. There was nothing romantic about it, at least not in the traditional sense. It was something deeper, a silent vow of respect, of equality, of survival earned, not given. As they moved, Remy leaned slightly closer. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Which part?" she replied. "Any of it. The choice to speak. The risk." Callista looked up at him, eyes unwavering. "No, because for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Remy smiled. "So do I." And in that glass tower, beneath a golden sky and the eyes of those who had once doubted them, a former maid and a reawakened billionaire danced, not just as colleagues, but as two souls who had refused to let the rot win. And in that moment, they weren't just survivors. They were builders of something new. In my view, the ending of this story is both earned and deeply satisfying. Not because everything wraps up neatly, but because the victory is honest. This isn't a tale where the good are rewarded with glittering applause, or the villains are carted off with melodramatic justice. Instead, it's a quiet, powerful transformation. A story about how courage can come from the most unexpected places, and how one whisper at the right moment can carry the weight of a revolution. Callista's arc is especially moving to me. She begins in silence, surrounded by walls of status, fear, and memory. Yet her decision to speak, to risk everything, without any guarantee of being believed, is the very definition of integrity. And Remy's evolution is equally compelling. A man of vision blinded by trust, forced to confront the decay inside his own house. But he listens, and he changes. That matters. The final image, two people dancing not for power, but for dignity and mutual respect, says more than any grand twist ever could. It's not a romance in the traditional sense. It's a communion of souls who faced fire and chose truth over convenience. It's the kind of ending that stays with you, quietly, like Callista's voice,